Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I'm doing a bit of nostalgia. I've got 3 science fiction movies and 2 horror movies in one box set, and they are in my sweet spot of nostalgia. It is a collection called Enter the Video Store Empire of Screams by Arrow Video, and there's the box. Terrific box set of 1980s movies produced by Charles Band's Empire Pictures. And for me, they're incredibly in my sweet spot. I'm going to review all the movies. There's the back with all of the extras on it if you want to freeze frame the squint at the screen. And this is the good stuff. This is, for me, sweet as hell. I will do the nostalgia thing in just a moment, but I'll show you all of the movies, and as I review them, I'll do them one at a time. But before I do, there's a really sick magazine kind of thing that comes with them. There are the movies themselves. And there's lots of pictures and lots of interviews and lots of essays about these 5 films. I'll go through this at my leisure. In fact, I've been reading it in between doing other things at the desk. But let's go through the movies. I'm doing them alphabetically, which isn't like best to worst. It's just alphabetical. All of them are entertaining. All of them are fun. And all of them you might remember from VHS days. By the way, wearing my Doctor Strange hat today, which I just bought. This one is an interesting film. It was written by Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson, who gave us the 1990 Flash television series. And they also wrote, and Danny Bilson directed, one of my favourite Charles Band movies, Zone Troopers, which is just 7 kinds of wonderful. I love this movie. But this one, they had a gig with Charles Band and they got a chance to write one of his films. They'd created the cover art before they ever got a script. There's the cover art for Arena, and Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson. Danny Bilson's still around. Unfortunately, Paul DeMeo died in the last couple of years. They decided what they were going to do is do the classic John Garfield movie, Body and Soul, in space. That was the gig they did. So they went to the studio that Charles Band and Empire Pictures had set up in Rome. It was the old Dino De Laurentiis studio, so there was a whole bunch of old sets lying around from Barbarella and other things, which is totally crazy, and I would have nicked everything from there. But the story is pretty simple. It's about a guy called Steve Armstrong, who's from Earth in the year 4038. He's in space working as a very bad short order cook in a diner run by a 4-armed alien guy played by Hamilton Camp, whose name is Shorty. Now, this is a future universe which is populated by aliens. Think the low-rent Deep Space Nine. And so the big thing of this space station is an arena where aliens and people fight one another for a championship. There's a beam that comes down from the ceiling which handicaps the different antagonists, so that a giant kind of grasshoppery lizard is evenly matched with, say, a human being, which happens in the movie. There's a criminal boss called Rogor, played by Mark Alimo, who ended up in Deep Space Nine playing a Cardassian. He has a sidekick called Weasel, played by Armin Shimmerman, who ended up playing Quark in Deep Space Nine. So there's a lot of Star Trek crossover in this. And there is a fight trainer played by Claudia Christian, who was in Babylon 5. So there's lots of people from science fiction series in this one. So basically what it is a sports movie translated into science fiction. You have to have a femme fatale, of course, and this one's called Jade, played by Shari Shattuck, who's a pop singer whose boyfriend is Rogor, the crime boss. She seduces Steve and drugs him so that he can't win a fight. All that kind of stuff happens. It's all the things you expect to happen in this kind of movie. Steve is played by a guy called Paul Satterfield, who at that stage of his life wasn't a particularly good actor, but he was muscular and tall and big and could move well, so they got him in to play the John Garfield role. Most of the aliens are basically people with skull caps and capes on, but this is a VHS era movie, and so we make allowances for that. It's one of those ones. Back in the day, Saturday nights, I used to go to local video stores to find something to watch, because television at that stage and to this very day didn't deliver a lot of good programming. We've been here for 22 years, so we were here during the end of the video era. So you go down to Hogan's Corner, or you go up to Wyndham Village, where you go down to Hoppers Crossing Railway Station. There are video stores at each of those places. And the way I did it was I would go to look at the new releases, most of which were out because somebody had borrowed them already. And then you'd immediately go to the science fiction and horror sections and see what was there. And what was inevitably there were all of these movies. That was in the changeover from VHS era to DVD era. And before that, when I was living close to the city, I'd go to the local video stores and maybe get a takeaway from the local fish and chip shop. It was a good time to just chill out. If there wasn't a party on, I was at home watching movies. And these movies were definitely part of that. Now, this version of it that Arrow have put out is not the best looking version of any of these movies. The rest of them look a lot sharper because this is a 2K restoration from a 35mm print, but the print I think may have been in television ratio. So they've kind of squeezed it a little bit. It's got a lot of grain to it. It's watchable. It's the best version of this that you're going to get. There are a whole bunch of experts as well. So you got an interview with Danny Bilson. You got an interview with makeup artist Michael Deek, who ended up playing the big bad monster at the end, who Steve has to fight for the championship. But there's image galleries, there's reversible art sleeve, and there's a theatrical trailer on. And the nice thing that Arrow have done on these as well is each one of these 5 films has cards. There's one of the monsters, and on the other side you've got part of the cover art. There's Drogor talking to Steve. And there's Steve and Jade being horizontal together. But you don't only get that. If you're that way inclined, and I haven't got room to put these up, but the movie also gives you the reversible cover art as posters. So there's the original cover art and the original poster for the film. And there's a specially done one for this particular Blu-ray release. So did I enjoy Arena? Yeah, I enjoyed it. It took me back to the day. I was very aware of the limitations of it. And again, this is not a high-budget film. And the special effects are used sparingly because most of them are, the beams coming down from the ceiling, which are fairly easy to do. There's a few zappy kind of special effects. And there's the space station itself shot from outside, which is a very basic model. But this movie isn't there to be in competition with the biggest and best of its time. It's there to be an entertainment. It's there to be a lot of fun. And it tells a story. Now, none of the actors cover themselves in glory in this, though Armin Shimmerman was always good at acting through prosthetic makeup, as he proved when he did Deep Space Nine. But they kind of know what the movie is. They give it what they've got. And I found myself liking this movie a lot more than I thought I would. I've seen it maybe twice before. But this time, that nostalgia factor and the fact that it tried something well beyond the resources available to tell this story was a lot of fun. Most of the people watching it weren't aware of John Garfield's movie Body and Soul. And DeMeo and Bilson knew that, and they unashamedly borrowed from that story, which is fine. It's an homage. It's kind of like Battle Beyond the Stars is Seven Samurai in space. But I liked that one. It was worth rewatching. I actually watched them in the order I'm going to tell you about them. The next one's one I hadn't seen before, and it's better than I expected it to be. It was directed by John Carl Buchler, who did a lot of the makeup effects for Empire Pictures movies. And his monsters always had a very signature look about them. It's got a couple of older actors from movies in them, and I kind of like that. Movies and television. Again, it was filmed in the Rome studios that Empire Pictures had at the time. A thing called Cellar Dweller, which surprised me. I think it's great fun. It's got a nice, hard landing at the end. It shows its limitations, but it also does some interesting things within those limitations. I'll read you the blurb, which will give it to you. Colin Childress, played by Jeffrey Combs, he's at the start of the film. A comic book artist with a penchant for the macabre takes inspiration from an ancient tome and dies in mysterious circumstances. Years later, his house is now an art institute run by Mrs. Briggs, played by Yvonne DiCarlo. A new student, Whitney Taylor, played by Deborah Farentino, arrives and occupies the cellar that used to be Childress's studio. An ancient evil is accidentally unleashed. This one's a lot of fun. It's got manifesting demons by drawing pictures. And I like it a lot. The supporting cast is kind of interesting. One of the people working at the Institute and one of the kind of artists working at the Institute is actually a writer, an ex-PI, played by Vince Edwards from Ben Casey, and who people best remember if they're movie buffs from Murder by Contract. And Vince Edwards was an actor who did a lot of really crappy films because he was a gambler and he made and lost tons of money gambling. So you got Yvonne DeCarlo, you got Vince Edwards in there, so that's kind of cool. Now, the kind of mandatory love interest is a kind of dweeby guy who's at the Art Institute, played by a guy called Brian Robbins, who, he had a mullet, he wasn't the prettiest looking actor in the world. He now runs Paramount Studios. He became an executive, and he now runs Paramount Studios after having run Nickelodeon. So that makes this one kind of interesting. Guy who runs Paramount Studios started out in a cheap Charles Band film. John Buchler's monster work in this is great. The demon that manifests is quite good. I like it. There's blood, there's guts. There's a demon claw decapitating Vince Edwards, which is something you can't say about many movies. Through the whole film, there's pretty much thunder and lightning outside. It's got that kind of vibe about it. And there are parts of it, maybe because of the Italian setting or maybe as a deliberate choice by the filmmakers, there are parts of this that remind me of Suspiria, a movie that I have a long history with, and I'll put a link in the description of this video on my video about Suspiria. But yeah, this one surprised me. It's effective. It has a kind of strong female lead, Whitney played by Deborah Ferrantino. The direction is quite good as well. Being a special effects guy, Buchler knew what to do. And even though there are limited sets in this, and it's pretty obvious that this large art institute isn't as large as the movie wants you to think it is. And I've grown to like this one. I've watched it a day ago, and ever since then I've kind of thought about it a bit and thought, I like this one. I think it's an honest little thing. It almost plays like a cross between Suspiria and maybe one of the episodes in a Creepshow movie. It's got that kind of vibe about it. And if you haven't seen Cellar Dweller, you should check that one out because it's a good, honest little 1980s horror film. The next one's, for me, the best of the bunch. It's a Stuart Gordon movie which stars Stephen Lee, Guy Rolfe, who was Mr. Sardonicus back in the old William Castle movie, an English actress called Hilary Mason who had a long career in film, Ian Patrick Williams, and written by Ed Nahar, who did a lot of work on Famous Monsters of Filmland and various horror-related movie magazines. It's a thing called Dolls. Now, this one surprised the hell out of me. There's a man and woman and a child in a car, and they're driving, and it's a dark and stormy night because it has to be a dark and stormy night. The car breaks down on a country road. The man is divorced, and he's got a new wife who's a rich woman, and he's got his kid for the summer holiday, a little girl. Neither he nor his wife treat the kid with any respect at all, which was a little bit triggering for me, but I knew they were going to get their come up, and so I kind of went with it. They find a house where an old man and an old woman live, and they're toy makers. He makes dolls and she helps him with it. And the house is full of dolls. Meanwhile, another car pulls up, broken down again, with a quite nice and kind of nebbishy guy, played by Stephen Lee, and a couple of punk girls who are obviously criminals. They're not the nicest people. They've conned the nebbishy guy into a ride, and it's pretty obvious that had the car not broken down, they would have beaten him up and robbed him. So the kindly old couple put them up for the night until everything's fine. They can get the car sorted out in the morning. They can stay the night. And then things start happening. The father and the stepmother get drunk in their room. The little girl's got another room. She's given a Mr. Punch doll by the old toy maker to kind of console her because she's lost her teddy bear. And Mr. Punch stays with her. And the nebbishy guy gets a room of his own. He's quite nice. He's kind of a slightly chubby but friendly and kind of empathic kind of character. Meanwhile, things start happening. The girls start to try to rob the place because they think there are antiques in it. And that doesn't go well. The stepmother and father, things don't tend to go well for them. And the little girl, played by Carrie Lorraine, has this idea that because it's a dark and stormy night, it's going to be the longest night in the world. And that plays through a thread in the movie, that for a lot of the characters, it's the longest night in the world. Of course, inevitably, the dolls are alive, and they're not kindly disposed towards nasty people. If people are children or childlike, they tend to get a pass. But people who are mean-spirited are not treated well by these dolls. And there's a whole bunch of really good makeup special effects. The dolls themselves are creepy as hell. And Stuart Gordon, who knows his way around doing horror movies, gives them a malevolence that really works, even though some of them are pretty dolls, some of them are also quite freaky. Recently I went to Ballarat and looked at some op shops, and there were a whole row of creepy dolls in one of the charity stores there. And I thought, those people have put those there deliberately like that so they look creepy. And I can't ever prove that happened, but they did. There's an audio commentary by David Dakota, and archival commentary with Stuart Gordon and Ed Nahar. Archive audio commentary with cast members Caroline Purdy-Gordon, Stephen Lee, Carrie Lorraine, and Ian Patrick Williams. An interview with Lee Percy, the editor of Dolls, and that's kind of interesting. I watched that one because he showed how they cut the movie together. I find that quite fascinating. There's about 3 other short commentaries on there as well. Theatrical trailer, alternative trailer, UK home video trailer. This one's got a lot of extras on it, and it works for me. It's just creepy as hell. Guy Rolfe and Hilary Mason do really well as the older couple there. They kind of don't go too large with the characters. They kind of understate them, and they're ambiguous characters depending on who they're talking to. And both of those actors do a really good job of kind of between are they good, are they evil, and what is their game plan for these people. I like this one a lot. I think it's a good, honest one. It's better than the budget and better than Empire Pictures usually did. So just to finish up on Dolls, much better than I thought it would be. Fantastic. I like what they did. It's not one of those movies that's going to give you nightmares if you're a grown-up, but don't show it to a child. Even though the kid played by Carrie Lorraine is creepy as hell at times, it's apt that she's creepy as hell. I think that was a deliberate choice. You should check that one out. Next up is the second science fiction one, which is kind of oddly science fiction because it involves an AI. It owes a little bit to Tron, and it had 5 directors. All the different segments were directed by different people. Rosemary Turo, John Buchler, Charles Band, David Allen, Steve Ford, Peter Manoogian, and Ted Nicolau. So they had about 7 directors on this. And it was also known as Rage War. It's a movie called The Dungeonmaster, which has Jeffrey Byron playing a computer scientist who has an AI at home. And because he has such a powerful AI and he's built a kind of remote control arm thing for it, he is challenged by a demon played by Richard Mole, who was the tall guy in Night Court, to 7 challenges, which are the 7 bits directed by different directors. Here's a beautiful girlfriend played by Leslie Wing, who's a dancer, and she, of course, is kidnapped by the evil guy, whose name is Mastema, and chained to a rock, which is stock standard for 1980s science fiction / fantasy. And he has to go through these challenges, one of which is a post-apocalyptic Mad Max-style car chase. Another one has a giant stone monster, very much in reference to Ray Harryhausen's Talos in Jason and the Argonauts. There's another one where it's a serial killer story where he has to rescue his girlfriend from a serial killer. He has 1 hour to do it. And so there are there's a couple of fantasy ones as well. So all in all, there's a whole bunch in here. And this is the movie that gave us the line from Mythbusters, I reject your reality and substitute my own. And so they're on the back there. So there's all the extras. This one is weird because it's very episodic. And the directing style and the look of each of the different episodes is very, very different. The John Carl Buchler one is very much his kind of model making and special effects prosthetic stuff. There's one that's set on the streets of Los Angeles. It's a weird combination of a bunch of different elements to tell a story. It does feel a little like things like The Sword and the Sorcerer. It owes probably a little bit to Tron. I'm not sure. I think Tron came out before this one. But it's got a kind of dynamic energy that I like. Jeffrey Byron's not fantastically wonderful as the protagonist in this. Paul Bradford, which is, they give him generic names in these movies. But he's serviceable. He's a kind of young, athletic guy. He does what's necessary. And Mastema, played by Richard Mole, is kind of good. They give him the worst possible dialogue for an antagonist. And it's soon apparent to Paul that Mestima is doing these challenges because he's immortal and he's bored shitless. It's fun. It really works well. It's got that energy about it. It's got that 1980s VHS era energy. I don't know how to describe it, but these low-budget films really tried hard to be entertaining. And they succeeded for the most part, as long as you didn't have too high an expectation for them. Now, this one not only has the cards and the poster in it, but they've got a fake video club membership for you. They're leaning into the video era thing on this, and there's your Arrow membership card. I haven't filled it out yet. The child's band part of this movie is kind of a hair metal rock thing, which is boring as hell for me. But there's one of the things from the hair metal rock thing. There's the protagonist and his girl. And there is Mestima macking on to Paul's girlfriend, played by Leslie Wing. This one's popcorn fun. It's got that over-the-topness about it that I really appreciate. There are so many movies like this in the 1980s on video shelves. But this one does well. The production values are quite good for the money. And I really appreciate that. Again, you get tons and tons of extras. The last 4 of these are really, they're as crystal transfer as you're going to get for these films. And the Dungeonmaster, aka Rage War, has 3 different versions on it. They've got the pre-release version, they've got the American version, and they've got the international version of it. And the pre-release version has a pre-title sequence where Paul is basically having a dream about a beautiful naked woman who is chasing, and there's a lot of nudity in it, and it's complete nudity. Not, of course, by the male person, but definitely by the female. Not sure why it was added, but I definitely think I know why it was taken out of the film. But the original version's there if you want to look at it. Now, this one is written by a friend of a friend, Joe Haldeman, who wrote The Forever War, good science fiction writer. Worked on the script for this one with Stuart Gordon. Stuart Gordon dumbed it down relentlessly after Joe Haldeman wrote the script. It's the only movie script he ever did. Robot Jocks. Now, Robot Jocks is basically a mecha kind of thing where the war is banned after 50 years after a very unfortunate nuclear exchange, and war is now fought by proxy by giant robots. That's pretty much what you need to know. There are 2 different groups. There's basically the Confederation, which is, let's just say, extended Russia, and there's the Market, which is the Western countries, including America. And in fact, one of the supporters of the protagonist is a guy called Tex, who is so over the top good old boy that it may give you gastric reflux. This one stars Gary Graham, who's kind of like the Scott Glenn you get from Wish.com. He plays Achilles, who is the Market's head guy with the robots, and he's going up against a guy called Alexander, played by Paul Kozlo, who was in the Omega Man. He was one of Shelley Winter's henchmen in Cleopatra Jones. Kind of always wore a bad hairpiece stuff for a certain stage in his career, and in this movie it's no exception. But the special effects in this are really, really good. It was directed by Stuart Gordon, as I said. But a guy called David Allen did the special effects. He did stop motion for this, for the giant robots. He did a whole bunch of practical effects with scale models in the desert. And the special effects took a while. There's a whole documentary about the contribution of David Allen to this, talking to a whole bunch of people who work with him on the film. And they have a lot of archival footage of them doing minor explosions with these kind of 1/24 scale giant mecha that they built. A lot of really good practical effects in this. They did incredibly well with that stuff. The story's pretty simple. Again, it's almost like Body and Soul. There's a whole subplot with genetically engineered humans who are going to be the next generation of fighters in this kind of endless war that's between the Confederation and the Market. And that's kind of interesting, but doesn't really particularly lead anywhere. It probably shows the potential to be dehumanized by the process of these kinds of sports/wars. And I can understand that viewpoint. There's a little, I think there may have been a contribution by Joe Haldeman. There's a lot of Joe Haldeman that got taken out of this film, particularly the fact that he was the only person that worked on the film who had actually been in a war. He was a Vietnam veteran and was quite badly injured as a part of that, which led him to write The Forever War and a number of his other books. He was using his art to deal with his trauma in a sense. There's still a little bit of him there. There's enough there to make it a little more interesting than it would be otherwise. But here are the cards. There's Gary Graham, and there's Gary Graham with one of the genetically engineered things, a woman called Athena, played by Anne-Marie Johnson. There's some of the mecha work, and it is really good. They're scale models, but they really look good on the screen, and it works really well for that. In fact, the special effects really are the star of this one. Gary Graham's character Achilles suiting up to go into the mecha. Now, a lot of these, there can be a lot of parallels between this and things like Pacific Rim. I think Pacific Rim may have borrowed from this. The Transformers as toys and as cartoons came out before Robot Jox, because of the Macross things that Japan was doing in anime. So giant fighting robots was definitely a thing in the 80s. But this one kind of works well. It ends on a really interesting note, which I'm not going to spoil. But I think there should have been a little more foreshadowing to that. There should have been just that little hint that things were going to go in that particular direction, but we didn't get that, unfortunately, which is a little bit of a shame. But again, limited budget. This one was filmed in America rather than in Italy like the other ones. But it works. It works as science fiction, and it is your only chance to see anything by Joe Haldeman in a video format. He's still around, and but his stuff hasn't really been adapted to other media. I don't even know if there's been any kind of a Forever War adaptation. There's been talk about it for a lot of years, but Robot Jox, better than I was when I first watched it. Now, maybe I've changed, but I think it was trying to do something interesting with a limited budget and with the writer and the director working at cross purposes. Stuart Gordon wanted to dumb everything down, and Joe Haldeman, being a science fiction writer, wanted to give it a grounded basis to the world building that the movie had, and they didn't come to blows with them, but they were antagonistic about it. So there's a lot of them. I'm just going to put the box together so I can show it to you again. A great piece of nostalgia also. It honours these movies, which weren't, like I said, the best movies in the world, but they were a part of the movies that we watched at the time. You couldn't always get the new releases, and you couldn't always get the big blockbusters at your local video shop. But you can be guaranteed you could almost always get these, particularly when you're renting, say, 5 weeklies for $10 at the time, or $1 each, depending on which video shop you went to. In that sense, they're nostalgic for us. There's the bottom of it, which gives you all of the titles of the movies. I like the fact that I got this box set. I paid for it. I saved up my pennies, and I took some bottles back to the shop and got the deposits on them and got it. And yeah, for me it works. It's they're not movies I'm going to watch all the time, but I like having them as part of the collection, and it made me nostalgic for that time. Not in a kind of my life is shit now, everything was better in the past kind of way, but in acknowledging and remembering good times in another era. I think that's part of the impetus for the Enter the Video Store Empire of Screams box set. You might still be able to find it if you look around. I hope you can, because this one sold out really fast in some of the places where you can buy it. But it's a great box set. It's worth your time and worth your money. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Going to be back with more hidden gems. I'm doing the letters E and F this time around. And I've got some interesting films to suggest in those two particular parts of the alphabet. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some movies with rubbery monsters in them. And I'll catch you next time.